because some people have acquired a monopoly in a drug, even a drug out of patent, and then raised the prices 1,000%. And those, of course, are the kinds of abuses that get real popular reactions. But in developing countries, these are matters of life and death. In the United States, they're redistributive. They give more money to the drug companies, and we all pay higher prices. But when you're a poor country and you don't have the ability to buy the drugs, then it's a matter of life and death. This is going beyond the usual framework, but I want to say the lack of workers' bargaining power is, I think, a competition issue and ought to be dealt within the competition framework. And privacy issues are competition issues. And that, one of the interesting things at the FTC hearing was they made it very clear that they view one of their main mandates now as privacy. And that is going to be one of their challenges going forward. There are some areas where concentration of market power are especially problematic. Finance is one, but another one is media. Because it's not just the concentration of market power in advertising that affects our society. It's the concentration in the marketplace of ideas. And that was one of the things that, you say the politics was behind the original passage of the antitrust. And if you think about it that way, this should be something that should be of great concern, and I don't think the way we've been looking at it is right. Let me talk finally about some of the specific issues for developing countries. And there are two or three that in particular I want to mention. I think competition can be an effective instrument as part of a broader set of instruments that the government has for pursuing public interest. Public interest in a development country really includes development, but also inequality. And there's been a reluctance by a lot of people to say that's going beyond the remit of competition policy. In every country, but especially in developing countries, the set of tools that you have are very limited. And I think you need to use all the tools in the toolkit. Admittedly, one has to be worried about abuses, and one has to be, worried about that you can keep it within a, you might say, a framework where you could have a rule of law, that it won't be abused. But let me just illustrate two or three aspects of that. The first is distribution. Economists have always said, the Chicago economists have said, our job is to make the pie as big as possible. We focus on efficiency. And distribution is handled by politics, that's something else. And in terms of economic theory, that reflects what is called the second welfare theorem. The first welfare theorem was the one that said markets are efficient, and that's only true if you have competition, perfect information, all these things that are not true. But the second welfare theorem said that you can separate out issues of efficiency and issues of distribution. And the second welfare theorem is also not true. That is to say, it's only true under these conditions of perfect information, perfect competition, and even more restrictive mathematical assumptions of convexity and so forth. So no one takes the second welfare theorem seriously outside of Chicago. And that means you can't separate issues of efficiency from distribution. That makes life much more difficult. It would be nice if you could, but you can't. So one has to be, it's not the main tool for addressing inequality, but it is something that you can't ignore. The second thing is I want to talk about is when we talk about competition, we have to talk about the whole competitive framework. If people can't get access to credit, you can't have entry. So you can have a lack of competition because individual firms can create barriers to entry. But you can also have a lack of competition because the market isn't functioning well. And part of your job is to try to create a better functioning market. And it may be that competition policy is an instrument for creating a better functioning market. And that's related to the third thing, which I think is obviously central to any developing country, which is development. And competition policy, the ability to have new firms into a market, give new opportunity, is both an issue of equality, but also an issue of dynamism. Remember, one of the things I said is dynamism is really important. And competition policy can be an example. So let me just refer to one of the cases I was involved with Dennis here in South Africa, which was the use of South Africa's competition policy when Walmart wanted to come into South Africa. And similar issues arise in many developing countries. It's not a level playing field. A small business can't compete with Walmart. In particular, if Walmart has monopoly power and able to use that monopoly power to get low prices in China, it puts small enterprises in South Africa at a competitive disadvantage. And you can't ignore the market power as a monopolist in the competitive landscape. So I think the Competition Authority in South Africa used competition law in a creative way where they didn't stop Walmart from coming in the acquisition of Massmart. What they did is to say that you have to help create support in local small firms, African firms, to enter your supply chain. And so they use this in a way to create a more competitive marketplace. And I was in South Africa last November and had a chance to talk to the head of Massmart, who had been forced to do this, and he actually was very happy that it had worked out well. It enhanced it. I don't think they would have done it without the compulsion, and the fact that they needed to be compelled is evidenced by how much work, how strongly they resisted the efforts of the government to make them do this. But in the end, it worked out well, and that just illustrates that the issue before, I think, a competition authority in a developing country is the broader issue is how do we use competition law to create a more competitive landscape in our country. And that's broader than the question in the United States or in an advanced country where you're looking at a particular firm and asking in what ways is it affecting negatively competition in a very narrow area. Okay, let me stop there.
All right, great. Thank you. So you have given us an enormous plate for thinking about issues and how we deal with them, both here and in developing countries. And since we're really short on time, this is what I'm going to do, because we were planning to have a discussion period, but we're squeezed. And we can take, let's say, arbitrarily 2 or 3 questions, and they have to be short and to the point, and